How will Grounded end? That's one of the biggest questions surrounding the game, and it's a question I get asked on a regular basis. Will we face a final boss? If so, will it be Dr. Tully or Burgle, or even a more imposing insect than the Broodmother? Will we get into the house or be unshrunk? There are many theories as to how the story will conclude, and in this video I'm going to discuss the most popular theories and let you know how I think the game will end. Before we begin, if this is the kind of thing you like to discuss, or if you just like to talk about Grounded or video games in general, consider joining my Discord. There are hundreds of gamers just like you over there, with more joining every day. I'll leave a link for it down in the description. Let's get started. One of the most common theories as to how Grounded will end is we will face a final boss, and among the list of leading contenders on who that final boss will be is Dr. Wendell Tully. So Dr. Wendell Tully is the person who created the shrink ray, the mysterious machine that actually shrunk us. Now, as far as I know, and I've gone through everything, I don't remember saying anything about this. I don't believe it has told us so far whether it was intentional or unintentional. I'm going to lean on the side of I believe it was unintentional. I don't think he would just shrink 4 kids and experiment on them. However, that could be the case. Maybe we'll learn that later on. I believe what ended up happening is we accidentally got shrunk, and now we're in the backyard, and we're playing through the story, and eventually we'll get more information. I'm here on the data tab under Wendell, and you can see there's only currently 3 out of 16 audio logs for Dr. Wendell Tully. So who knows when we're actually going to get the rest of these. I'm sure it'll be in the next couple updates. Maybe they're going to save them all for the last update, the full release, when we get it, so we'll get more of the story. But will Dr. Wendell or can Dr. Wendell be the final boss? I mean, sure, he possibly could be. And I think there's evidence that leans towards him being the final boss and also not being the final boss. So why do I think he might not be the final boss? Well, from everything I've seen and heard and read in the data tab of all the notes and stuff like that, so the logs, the notes, all the different stuff, he seems like a good guy. So I kind of compare him to Rick Moranis from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is the movie that the game is loosely based off of. In that movie, Rick Moranis was just creating a shrink ray. He was trying to experiment on things. He had no ill intentions. And I kind of feel like Dr. Wendell Tully is just a mirror image of him, or is strongly based off of him. That's at least the impression I get. However, if you go through the log, so we're just going to go through the first log here. I'm not going to go through all of them. In the first Wendell log, it says, "Where's my PhD going now? Kaminsky works here and he's an idiot." So you can see, so he's got his pay cut. He's now having to substitute teach at a local school to make ends meet. So there is evidence that maybe he's unhappy and perhaps he could turn evil because of that. Although I'm still leaning towards, I'm more on the side of the fence of the final boss is not going to be Dr. Wendell unless he's completely snapped, or maybe Omni Practical Technologies, the company that he has worked for, maybe they manipulate him in some way and force him to become evil. But I'm leaning towards Dr. Wendell Tully not being the final boss. So let's rule that out for now. Although, like I said, there is a chance he could be the final boss. There's evidence for both him being it and not being it. But right now I'm leaning towards him not being the final boss. Another common suggestion for who could be the final boss in Grounded, if there is a final boss, is actually Burgle. So Burgle is the robot that you're going to find or meet shortly after the game starts. You're going to go over, repair the Oak Tree Lab, and he's going to be the one that gives you quests. He's going to send you out. He's going to allow you to buy stuff from him to make your experience easier, more enjoyable, and stuff like that. However, if you do get a closer look, and I can't do it here because I can't zoom in. Actually, we might be able to go into photo mode. Let's go into photo mode and see if we can zoom in here. So on his front panel, you'll actually be able to see, and we'll hide the settings here. You'll actually be able to see that his settings on his front panel say cook, flip, and kill. So because it says kill on there, there is a theory that Burgle will end up being evil and might end up turning on us. Now, could this happen? I mean, of course it could. It's a fantasy sci-fi-ish video game where pretty much I think anything could happen at this point. I mean, we're shrunk down to the size of we're a centimeter tall. So, I mean, anything could theoretically happen in this. Do I think Burgle is going to be the final boss? I do not. And I just think I think this is kind of here as just a little bit of a teaser to throw people off. Is there a chance it could be the final boss? Of course there is. We don't know what's going to happen. There's not enough information right now to conclusively say, yes, this is definitely what's going to happen. Could he be the final boss? Yes. Do I think he's going to be the final boss? No. I think this is just kind of a little red herring here that's on here that would make it seem like he could end up turning on us. How would I see him turning on us if he did? I don't think Dr. Tully would turn him on us. I think more likely than not, Omni Practical Technologies, who seems to be this evil mega corporation, would be the one that would turn him on us and have him fight against us. So I don't expect to fight him. If we do fight him, that'd be a pretty cool fight because I imagine he would be harder than the assistant manager. But I think that if he's a final boss, I don't think Burgle is the most likely final boss. So what other final bosses could there be outside of another insect? We're going to talk about the insects that might be the final boss in just a second. But of course, if you play through the game, you're going to be aware that there's many labs. So we're right now in the Oak Tree Lab. There are labs across the map in all the different biomes of the game right now. They could create another robot outside of Burgle because the assistant manager was added in the Hot and Hazy update. he was a dangerous robot. There are tased keys, and there are archers that are guarding the labs. So perhaps I would think if Omnit adds a final boss, or there's a final Omnit boss, while it could be Burgle, I think it also could be a brand new robot that maybe is even stronger than that, that's added in one of the final labs that hasn't been added to the game right now. So right now there's at least one lab that we cannot get into that is over on the right side of the map. So we'll just show you real quick. There's a lab door over here on this retaining wall that's been there, I believe, since the beginning of the game that we cannot get into. Of course, there's other lab doors. There's a couple in the koi pond that you cannot currently get into. They look like they're kind of small. The berry monster lab over there, we don't know what's going to be inside of there, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So if Omnit's going to be the final boss, I think it'll be more likely they're going to create a new robot and not be Burgle. But like I said, there's always a chance it could be that they corrupt Dr. Wendell Tully, or that Burgle gets flipped over to evil, and he's actually the final boss we fight. So if it's not going to be Dr. Wendell Tully or Burgle or even a new robot that's created, what is most likely to be a final boss? And the first one I'm going to suggest would be the berry monster. So I'm walking over here towards this lab that's over here. We're not going to be able to get into it or clip into it anymore because they have fixed that. You used to be able to clip through it. But there is a lab over here on the wall that we haven't gotten into, so obviously we'll probably get into this in one of the future updates. I mean, the game's supposed to be finished right now by the end of the year, so we should be able to getting into this lab in one of the next couple of updates, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't hold this till the end, because perhaps it's going to be the very final lab. So we're going to head over here, and there is a lab up in here, and we're in creative mode, so none of the bugs are going to attack us. There's a lab door right in there that we can't get in, and like I said, that's been there, I believe, since the beginning of the game, since the game was launched. You used to be able to clip through it, and there was a berry monster in there. It was called a berry monster because what it was it looked like one of the hedge berries, but it had teeth on it. So perhaps that is actually going to be an enemy that's inside of that lab and could be a boss. If this is the final lab, that could be the final boss. I would say that's the only evidence we have that it would not be either a robot or it would not be one of the insects in the game or a new insect. That's the only thing that's been odd that's outside of the game. I mean, of course, the game is sci-fi. Like I said, we're shrunk down, so there are some odd things. But so if it's not the berry monster, what is it most likely to be? Well, I think more likely than not, if there's going to be a final boss, if it's going to be an insect, it's probably going to be one of a couple insects that have not been added yet. So, of course, there's been talk about a mantis boss being added, or a mantis in general. Now, we don't know if it's going to be a boss, but I think more likely than not, if a mantis is added, it'll probably be added very late, and it'll probably be up here in this top right corner, because there were pictures in one of the trailers a couple months ago that showed a hedge or a new bush or something up here, or a garden area. So I think if they add a mantis and it is a boss, it would most likely be up here. And I do think that would probably be in one of the later updates, maybe the last update that they released before at 1.0 when they completely conclude the story. However, I'm not exactly sure. I think that might just end up being like a broodmother where it's just like a side boss that you can fight, but it's not really part of the story. Now, right now you can fight the broodmother over in the hedge, but we don't actually know, is that even necessary? Is that just a side thing you do, or is that going to be part of the storyline? Like, you actually have to defeat her, because you can resummon her back in. We also don't even know if the mantis is going to be a boss. The speculation it's going to be a boss is, if it gets added, is because it has a full set of armor, and I think a weapon as well, like a scythe or something like that. So logically, if they went through all that trouble and added all that stuff, it would make sense for it to be a boss. However, the bosses that are in the game currently, the broodmother only has a helmet and a club. The assistant manager doesn't drop anything except for a key card, and the termite king isn't really even a boss. He's just like a beefy termite. All he drops is resources to make one piece of armor. So the full armor set for the mantis almost makes me believe that it might not even be a boss, but perhaps it will be. Now, aside from that, there's also it's been on the feature board forever, and that's going to be the Ant Queen. The Ant Queen has been on the feature board on the Obsidian Grounded website for as long as I can remember, or at least when I went as far back as I can remember checking it. In the Hot and Hazy public test server, there was ant pheromone in the game. That's also on the list of things that are coming in the future. So I honestly thought because it was in there, it was going to come sooner than it has not come yet. So what I mean, the speculation is basically that if the ant pheromone will come, we'll either get it from beating the Ant Queen or destroying the colony that's around the Ant Queen, or perhaps, and then we'll be able to control the ants or somehow use them, keep them away or manipulate them in some way. However, from my research, and like I said, I'm not an expert in bugs or insects or anything like that, but I did some research. From what I've seen, ant queens are typically not hostile. Normally, the worker ants and the soldier ants will protect them, specifically the soldier ants, but even the worker ants will get involved. So the Ant Queen, to me, if it's going to be a final boss, it's going to be a different final boss than anything we have ever had. I think more likely than not, it will be tons of soldier ants that are protecting it, and we have to kill waves and waves of soldier ants before we actually take down the Ant Queen. So I don't really think the Ant Queen is going to be the final boss. I think she will probably be a boss added at some point in the future, but I don't think she's going to be the final boss. Now, outside of those, are there any other insects that could possibly be added? I mean, people have talked about like a dragonfly. We don't have a flying boss right now, I guess, although I guess you could say the assistant manager is a mini boss and he does fly. But Perhaps they had a wasp boss or something like that, because there were wasps in the original, I guess the trail, I don't know if it's the trailer, but the original artwork for the game had wasps. Now, of course, things change over time. Maybe they wanted to have wasps at the beginning and they've changed their mind and not going to add them. Maybe they're going to add them in the future. The beehive hasn't really had much work done. They could add a queen bee, which would be an interesting boss fight. Although, like I said, I don't think queen bees fight either. I think the hive would protect them. Although that could be an interesting boss fight. So those are the things that, is there going to be a final boss? I don't know. I think there might be, there's going to be more bosses along the way, but I think they're just going to progress the story, and I don't know if they're actually going to be the final boss. So right now, in my opinion, the most likely candidate to be a final boss, if there is going to be a final boss, is going to be something from Omnit. It's going to be a big robot. I think there's a small chance it could be Burgle, although I'm not really counting on that right now. I think more likely than not, it could be something along the lines of the assistant manager, but larger, where they've created a mega dangerous robot that will end up fighting. So I think that's most likely, if there's a final boss, it will be something from Omnit that gets put into one of the labs, maybe the last lab, and that's what we end up fighting. So beyond that, even if there is a final boss, what's going to happen? And I think obviously there's two things that could possibly happen. Number one is we just stay shrunk and that's how the story ends. I think that's very unlikely. I think the more likely scenario is that we somehow get unshrunk. That's how Honey, I Shrunk the Kids work. I don't know that they're exactly going to copy that movie or the formula for that movie, but I think that's most likely what's going to happen. It would be kind of weird if the game just ended and we were still shrunk, unless they're planning on working on a sequel, which I know some people are dying to have, but there's been no mention of a sequel. I've seen nothing in terms of a sequel, and even like DLC or stuff like that. I know people have talked about that. The developers have said they're going to keep adding content after the game is finished. After 1.0, they're going to keep adding content. To what level, I don't know. I think that might depend on how much success it has when it gets full release, like how much sales it has, how many players it has, how it maintains the players, and stuff like that. So will we be unshrunk? I think we're going to be unshrunk. I think that's most likely going to happen. Now, in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, of course, the kids get inside the house, then they get unshrunk. The developers have said there are currently no plans for us to get in the house. I did a whole video recently on things that are not currently planned for the game. I'll leave a link for that down in the description below, as well as put a card up in the corner right now if you missed that video. In that video, I basically just nixed the idea of us going into the house. The developers have been asked multiple times. I've heard them say, they said it on a live stream just like a week or two ago, that there are currently no plans for us to go in the house. They even said there's no plans for us to go in the shed. So the idea of us getting unshrunk and eventually going inside the house, or being inside the house and getting unshrunk, or getting unshrunk and going inside the house, are just not likely. Will we get unshrunk, though? I think that is the most likely scenario on how the game is going to end. Whether or not we fight a final boss along the way, I don't know. Maybe we do, and then we get the key to fixing the mysterious machine, and then somehow we get unshrunk. But I think the most likely way the game's going to end is going to be the most obvious way, and I think that's going to be that we end up just getting unshrunk, and we're returned to normal size, and that's how the game ends. The game is supposed to be story-driven. It is going to have a beginning, middle, and end. I guess we'll possibly still be able to play afterwards. So perhaps when we get to the point where we get to maybe a cutscene that says, do you want to be unshrunk? If you get unshrunk, the game ends, or do you want to continue playing? Maybe after the cutscene, you can just revert back and continue playing as long as you want. So it'll just be a sandbox game where you just do whatever you want. Or it could be just you get unshrunk and the story ends. And I think that's most likely what's going to happen. If there's going to be a sequel for the game, maybe we get shrunk again or something like that. I don't know. Like I said, there's been no mention of a sequel. Grounded has been a side project with a very small team from Obsidian. I've seen a lot of people say when I say stuff about, for example, I would like to see updates quicker, more often like that. People are like, but it's just a small company. Not true. Obsidian is actually it's a decent sized company with hundreds of developers. There's only a small team on this game. In one of the recent dev live streams, they mentioned, I think there's like 15 or 20 people working on it. I'm not sure how many of those are developers, but we've always been told there was around a dozen or so developers on the game. So it makes sense. There's about 15 or 20 people working on the game currently. And Obsidian has at least a couple hundred employees. They have been acquired by Microsoft a couple years ago, but they are also working on other games. So if a Grounded 2 is in the pipeline, I don't think it will come for years anyway, because they have other games that are coming out sooner, which like The Outer Worlds 2, Avowed, those are going to be AAA RPG games, which is what Obsidian is known for. And while Grounded has been great, and I love the game, survival games, a small little survival game like this was just a little side project that they let a couple people work on, which is awesome. But I don't think that there's going to be a ton after the 1.0 release. I don't see a sequel unless the game somehow has blockbuster sales that are unexpected after the full release. I hope that happens. I'd love to see it. But I think, like I said, the most likely scenario is we will get unshrunk and then the story will just end. If you want to continue playing, you can. I think for most people, they'll go through the story, get unshrunk, and it's just going to follow the most logical path. There's not going to be any twists and turns. I know everybody wants there to be some kind of crazy ending where you get completely tricked and don't really know what's going to happen, and we get this weird ending that nobody would have ever suspected. But I think more likely than not, we will possibly fight a final boss, complete all the labs, and then we will end up getting unshrunk. Perhaps meet Dr. Tully, maybe not. I think maybe we will. I don't know. And then that'll be the end of the story, and that's how the game finishes. That's my theory on how Grounded will end. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you like talking about this kind of thing or video games in general, join my Discord where we have conversations like this every day. There's a link for it down in the description. Thank you for watching, and thank you to the Overseer91, Grey Knight, Baz Channel, and all my other channel members who help make videos like this possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.